Have a seat on your porcelain throne. It's time to talk some shit on the Powell Movement.
Welcome to the Powell Movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and I have to start this thing out by telling you what an incredible Labor Day weekend I had. This whole story starts back in 2022, when I was looking at the Game Time app, and this is an app that I use for concert tickets and sporting events, and they don't pay me at all, but they have pretty amazing pricing for tickets. So I'm on this app in 2022, and I see Metallica and Pantera is coming to Seattle. And by accident, I push a button, and next thing I know, I not only bought tickets to Metallica Pantera, but I also bought tickets to Metallica Five Finger Death Punch. So I ended up spending $60 a night to sit in the nosebleeds and see these two shows. And while I had kind of forgotten about the shows because I bought the tickets 2 years ago, they kind of did sneak up on me. And I was so psyched when I realized they were just a couple weeks away when I looked at my phone and realized I had tickets. I haven't seen Metallica since Woodstock 94, and I've never ever seen Pantera, but I've always wanted to, even if Dimebag Darrell and Vinny aren't around. So for the first night, my plan was to meet up with some buddies and then go see Pantera and Metallica. The guys I met for beers all had shit seats as well, so when we got to the stadium, we headed straight for the bar at section 146, and we found a great standing room only area, and we watched Pantera from there. It was heavy and it was really good, and you could see like the dust kicking up in the mosh pit. It looked so awesome and so fun down there, and I wished I was down there, but I wasn't. The one thing that did suck about Pantera's set was the sound was off, and while I could blame Lumen Field, it's not their fault. Whoever's Pantera's sound guy was didn't really dial them in well and did them a disservice, and to all of us fans, well, we didn't get great sound for Pantera, and that was okay. They were still awesome. During Pantera's set, I got a text from a different buddy saying that he had a bracelet for me to watch the Metallica show from platforms. I don't know what that meant, but I was like, hell yeah, I'd love to get that bracelet. How do I meet up with you? He's like, are you on the floor? And I tell him that I wasn't. And he goes, well, if you can get on the floor, call me and I'll have all the beer you can drink, an elevated platform to watch the show from, and we'll be right next to the stage. He's like, Mike, I know you can do it. And he was right. He totally motivated me to think up a plan to get me down onto the floor. And I could tell you how I got my floor access, but I'm not going to. What I will say is that I made it down very easily with the help of a nice usher. So then I call my friend and I'm like, hey, I'm down on the floor. I'd love to grab that bracelet. He goes, well, look over to one of the towers where the video screens are. I'm going to be standing below the video screen. I'll be waving my hand crazily and you'll see me. And then this is where you come to get your bracelet. I let him know that I can't see him anywhere. So then I do something really, really stupid. I go find another usher and I ask him where the area I need to go is. He stops me and he says, wait a minute, how did you even get down here without a bracelet? At this moment, I lock eyes on his, he locks eyes on mine. We stare at each other for about 3 or 4 seconds. I say, don't even worry about it, man. And I turn my back and I disappear into the crowd. I go get myself a beer. I find a good spot, about 25 people back. Call my buddy and tell him not to worry about me, that I'm going to be up in the front. And the show started with Creeping Death and I could barely contain myself. I had so much energy that others must have realized it and they kind of grabbed me and pushed me into the pit where I went crazy for the first 3 songs. I was totally drenched, just dripping sweat. And when the pit died in our area after the 3rd song, I was like 6 people back from the front for the rest of the show. And it was incredible. But the whole time I wanted things to be faster. I wanted my area to blow up in a pit again, but it didn't happen. Whatever. They ended with Master of Puppets. I caught a guitar pick from Kirk Hammett, and it was one of the better show experiences of my life. Going into night 2, I was planning on another solo mission, and there was no way I wasn't going to get on the floor. After that night 1 experience, I just had to. So I met up with a different buddy and some of his friends at the Central Saloon. If you're in Seattle, check out the Central. It's a super rad place. The service isn't that great, but it's worth it just to check out the posters on the wall. There's so much history there. So we were at the Central for a few beers, then we headed to the stadium, about an hour before Metallica went on. We went to the same bar area that I was at the first night, and I stayed there for about 5 minutes, and then I told the guys I was going down on the field. And again, while I really want to tell you my floor access hacks, I need to keep them top secret so they don't get out and don't get abused. So I'm keeping them to myself. Anyways, 5 minutes later, I'm on the floor, I get a beer, and I head to a spot about 20 people back from the stage. I've seen the set list, so I know the first 3 songs are going to be crazy again. My plan is that when the pit starts, I'm going to stay in it until I get tired, and then I'm going to ride the pit like a rip current as close to the front as it'll take me. When I get out, I'm on the front edge of the pit, about 3 to 5 people deep. The whole area was like a mini pit of 20s to aging white dudes dripping sweat from headbanging. I caught another guitar pick, this time from Robert Trujillo, and had one of the best concert experiences of my life. Both nights were incredible, but I would say the second night, it was so insane because I was so close. My Oura Ring said that I danced 600 calories off. When I say danced, it was more hitting and pushing people in a sweaty, crazy mosh pit, an experience that I haven't had in like 20 years, and it was so fun. One thing I did notice when I was leaving the show was that walking out of the venue, the crowd kind of reminded me of the Grateful Dead crowds I've been seeing leaving Dead shows. A lot of limping old people struggling after exerting themselves more than they have in a long, long time. So don't slack on your fitness. It will hurt you in a concert environment. But I'm not here to talk about a concert environment. I am here to talk about a badass athlete who has an incredible story. And this is one of the best redemption stories I've ever had on the podcast before. Lindsey Jacobellis should be a household name. She's a 2-time Olympic gold medalist from the 2022 Olympics. But before she was a 2-time Olympic gold medalist, she has a silver medal that she won back in 2006 when everyone was expecting her to win a gold medal, and she tried a method on that last roller. She didn't land it, she didn't get a gold medal, and the world turned her into a villain. People were so mean to Lindsey Jacobellis that it was not fair, and Lindsey had to deal with a lot of shit over the years to get herself in the right mindset to win her first and second Olympic gold medal. I'm not going to spoil the podcast anymore right now. What I will do is ask you to tell a friend about the show. If you like the podcast, I'm sure your friends with common interests are going to like the podcast as well. And since I'm not an A-list athlete or an athlete period, I'm just a dude who has a podcast who knows the industry really well. I don't have a built-in audience. And by you telling your friends, that really does help the show grow. What else helps the show grow is sharing my social posts and reviewing me wherever you listen to the podcast. Thank you very much for doing it. Thank you for listening. And thank you for supporting my incredible sponsors who make this podcast happen. They are Club Med, Stanley, Best Day Brewing, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, Elon Skis, and Outdoor Research. Now it's time to talk to 2-time Olympic gold medalist, Lindsey Jacobellis. You're one of those athletes that are squeaky clean, which is a good thing in life, but not as great for a podcast. But that doesn't matter because your story is so amazing. But there was one incident that I found interesting. What's the story about you knocking out Mrs. DeSantis?
What? That's interesting that came through. I think I was just really excited and I was running to get to class and not be late. And I just blasted through a door really, really fast and didn't realize that someone potentially could be on the other side of it. And it just so happened to be Mrs. DeSantis. And I felt horrible knocking her down. And it was definitely something, it was a learning experience in life for sure.
It sounded like a cartoon moment. When I was told the story, it sounded like she just flew and she was like this old, frail lady that you just blew up. Not on purpose by any means.
I mean, it was one of those moments where you're like, oh my God, is this really happening? So I didn't really know what really to do and how to react in the moment because it just didn't seem real. And, you know, when you're just young, you're not thinking things through fully, you know, you're not thinking of like consequences. So you're like, you know, I will go full speed through a door because I'm late for class, and you get caught not thinking things through.
Well, that happened at Stratton Mountain School. And are there any other laugh out loud stories from your time up there at SMS?
It's hard to remember stories in high school, but, you know, it's interesting when Stratton Mountain School was still in the old building that was literally walking distance to the lodge. And that's when I was in 8th grade. It was this really old rundown building that was really just focused around, you know, finding kids that are excelling in athletics and making sure that they have access to the mountain, and then they come back and they just basically have a room to study in. Obviously, when Stratton Mountain School wanted to get bigger, you know, they needed to make these certain upgrades to make themselves more appealing for a bigger audience and to attract more students to the school. So they did do the nice upgrade down the street, but then we weren't able to walk to the convenience stores or even just walk right to the mountain. So it was a little bit of an adjustment, but I remember being back in that old building, Our first class was math. And sometimes if we had a POW day, we'd show up and our teacher might not be there. And we're like, well, shit, next POW day, we're not coming to class because we'd see the math teacher ripping down the hill. And we're like, yeah, I think we can skip math class today and have to make it up another day.
That's so cool.
Once we moved to the new school, we weren't close to the lodge and the little convenience store that was right there. So we had to change up our lifestyle a little bit in Stratton world. And every time I go back there now, there's a beautiful new building. The gym is so awesome and the field is beautiful. The whole campus is just growing. And it would be nice to look back and be like, oh, I've been so sick if we had some of these amenities. But we were in that transition, my class of 2003, that we got into the school, but there wasn't a lot quite happening yet. So it's always exciting to go back and pay a visit and to see what's been added, what's new, what's been painted, what's been changed. And you just kind of walk through and then you realize how old you are.
Well, you didn't grow up in Vermont. You grew up in Connecticut. I think Roxbury is the town that you grew up in. And it's your mom, dad, and your older brother, Benny. And being that you and your brother became professional snowboarders, you guys have good genes. Were your parents serious athletes growing up?
My dad came from a very athletic family, as well as my mom. My mom didn't do a lot of athletics because it wasn't really available for her in her generation, especially in high school.
Sure.
So she grew up actually behind a golf course, and her dad was an avid golfer as well as her mother. So that was pretty much what was offered to my mom and her two sisters to kind of get in some sort of athletic rhythm. So they all would play. They'd hop the fence and get on the public course and walk around. And I learned how to play golf at an early age. I didn't quite have the patience for it. So my parents did not push me in that sport, we'll just say. But it was really cool to see how diverse the athletics were in my family on both sides.
And is it true that your mom always thought that you'd be a circus performer or an Olympian, or is that just some media made up story that was fun to tell?
No, my mom definitely would say that from time to time because being the younger sibling, you tend to be a little bit more wild. The older sibling kind of just like lays down the tracks. Your parents are trying to get a sense of like what individual your firstborn is. And then, okay, the secondborn's completely different. And that was definitely me. I was daredevil, wild child. And my brother would always be down to get into shenanigans and build forts and tree swings. And then he'd be like, yeah, you test it. Because his theory was like, well, if it didn't work with your weight, it's definitely not going to work with my weight. So we'll just build up to it. And we had this great, beautiful, giant oak in our backyard in Connecticut, still there. And that's where we put our rope swing. And it wasn't just this traditional rope swing that you're sitting on and just like pushing back and forth. It was this single rope and it was on this hillside. So you essentially started right next to the tree, but then ran away from the tree because it was on this hillside. And so then it would kind of just take you in this round circle until you would land on the other side of the tree as you're like finishing running uphill. I don't know if I could really describe that well.
Sounds like a step down and you hold on and you come back. And if you don't, you land on the step down.
Right. And so it worked with however tall you were really, because you would just leave the ground at different times. So me being small, I left the ground pretty early. I'd only get a few steps before having to swing completely around and then, put down your landing gear and start running. And then you'd land and run back up the hill the other side. And I don't know how we came up with that whole swinging concept. And I think when my mom came out and she saw that, and that was where like the trapeze kind of concept came out. And she was like, yeah, you're definitely like going to probably be in the circus. Because my brother at that time was super into baseball and football. And I was being put in all the seasonal sports, but wasn't really leaning towards one or the other. And so the joke was that I'll probably be in the circus.
And I guess growing up, hearing you talk, is it all about chasing your brother Benny and idolizing him and doing whatever he wants to do? And does that almost make you, for lack of a better term, like a tomboy with crazy hair?
That's one way of putting it. My brother's 5 years older than me. We grew up in the woods in Roxbury. It's still such a beautiful place, and they have so much land trust all around in that area. It hasn't been a place that's been really developed, which is so beautiful. But then you realize you're not super close to your friends. Like, you rely on your parents to drive you to your friend's house, or you're taking the bus to your friend's house after school with your little note, your little permission slip that you can get on that bus, and your parents will pick you up someplace else later. Now, where I live in California, kids can be walking to their friends' houses, and they can be biking and e-biking. Just the accessibility is completely different to what my generation and location provided me as a young kid.
So you were like on an island pretty much.
It kind of felt that way at sometimes. And so I think probably my brother was like, well, I'm either playing by myself or I wrote my sister into it. And it's not like my brother was going to exactly be playing dolls with me. So we're running football patterns, but I liked it. And, when you're constantly trying to keep up and you have that energy of that younger sibling, you want to be included. You don't want to be left out. There's that FOMO that I think a lot of younger siblings have if they don't have a different social group to tap into, which was just my scenario. So it's not like every day I'm doing boy things. I'd go and I'd have close girlfriends as well. And they had the Barbies and the dolls and the things that they like to do. And that's what made it so special to go to Emma or Fawn's house, because they had sisters and they had a totally different vibe. But then I go and hang out with my brother and we're doing drills of getting ground balls or pop flies or running football patterns. And it was really the best of both worlds. I don't look back on it and be like, oh, I'm bummed that I didn't do more girl things. I look at it as I was given the opportunity to try all different types of athletic endeavors and have all these different types of experiences as a kid. And we are products of our environment. And my brother definitely created this very competitive sport environment from a very, very young age. And then my dad was my coach in a lot of my sports, starting at T-ball and Little League and in middle school. And then my brother would come and also assist. So it was just always like a very, very family oriented. When my brother had his games, competitions, whatever, the whole family goes. My dad would drive from work, meet my mom and myself there. We're set up. We've got the chairs, we've got the train whistles, and vice versa. When it was my turn, the whole family would come. So I look back on those situations as very, very fond memories. There's always those challenging times with an older sibling, especially a brother. Those things are inevitable, but I truly think it did give me the platform to really grow and develop as an athlete pretty early on.
I mean, you're competing against the guy who's 5 years older than you and is going to cut you no slack because you're his little sister. I mean, he probably would punch you if he wanted to, because the older brothers are allowed to do that. So I can see that making you more competitive and getting you better than you would be if you didn't have a guy 5 years older than you pushing you. And your dad's your coach in all your teams, and it sounds like you were a talented athlete. But we're not going to talk about your team sports stuff because the Jacobellis family is all about snow, it sounds like. And you guys go to the mountain every weekend. Stratton is your home mountain and you have a place up there. Were you and Benny put in a ski program when you were younger? Like, did you ski race? Or did you guys just learn to love going fast by chasing your family around the mountain and not wanting to be last?
It was always just a family endeavor. I think I got put into the Allegro program once or twice, and we had some family friends up there that had their kids in it. And we'd kind of jump in with a couple of their classes. But my dad ultimately really wanted to spend time with us because he worked the entire week. And he didn't want us to be then put into a program and then not get to ski with us the entire weekend. So his thought and his mindset around that was like, we come up here to do something as a family. It was never this competition driven angle. It was always about coming together as a family, and we had the Moore family and we had the Shaw family. Those were my dad's like really, really longtime friends, and then their wives, and they started having kids. So we made it just this multi-family affair. And you're either getting up and getting to the mountain for first run, or you were in the second wave if you were not fast out of the house. And then if you were the youngster or just the one that was starting to learn to ski, you were in the afternoon session, potentially with, one of the parents as they rotated out. It just kind of depended how old the kids were, where everyone was in their life, right?
Yeah. And then eventually Benny finds snowboarding, and I think he picks it up really quickly, and he's a natural. Do you see that? And are you like, I want to do that too? And is that how you get into snowboarding?
I mean, I remember my brother being so enamored by like watching some of the snowboarders go down the mountain. And he's always somebody that could look at something, and my dad was the same way, that just by understanding and seeing how somebody moves, they could teach themselves to do that movement as well and really break it down. And you could see those like wheels spinning when we'd be on the lift and going up, because this was not high speed lifts. We were on the North American lift, and that was a very, very slow lift. So you're watching everyone come down, and you're getting to see everyone in all of their glory, or not so much.
Right.
That's when snowboarders started to make their appearance, and my brother would be like, look at this, it's like surfing. And Bob Moore would be like, it's like snurfing, because that was how snowboarding kind of started.
Yep.
And I think it was my dad that said, like, why don't you let Benny kind of try it? Because maybe you don't know if you're going to like it, and let Benny do this first. And so Benny and Bob tried it because they thought they would be really both very much into it. And I was told, we're going to see how this goes, and then we can assess if you're going to do it. Also, it was not easy to find kids' equipment then. So we would have had to pretty much jerry-rig everything. And I think my brother and Bob Moore were wearing Sorels. They weren't even wearing snowboard boots.
Yeah, that's like 94, 95, right?
Right. They're like, oh, this will work. Like, we can do that. Yeah. So I remember they're like, no lesson, just take the gondola, go to the top. And they're like, well, we'll like go down Mike's way because it's a mellow run. And I remember everyone getting super frustrated that we're just having to go so slow. It was not the tempo of our group. Our group is get down to the bottom as fast as possible, regroup there, get back in the gondola, and everyone talk about their run, where they found good snow, who passed who, all those kind of moments. And now we're having to go at this really slow pace, watching Benny and Bob try to figure this sport out with no instruction.
Right.
And Bob got very frustrated and he gave up on it. And my brother just kind of kept hammering it away and trying to figure out how to really put this all together. And by the time he was probably halfway down the meadows, he had figured out how to link his turns and was able to just keep cruising. And that was kind of it. And when Benny was so excited and experienced this brand new sport, and you saw how his face lit up, it was like, okay, I'm sold. How do I get to do this now? Then the parents are like, ooh, we can incentivize this. Like, do your chores, get all this done, help us with this, and we'll look into a snowboard for you. And I think it was around Christmas that I got that little Burton Air. And I've looked so hard to find that on eBay, and I've had no luck because unfortunately, when we did lose our house in the fire, we lost a lot of those early memories that we couldn't get back. And one of them was my very first snowboard.
So that's a bummer, because I did read about the house fire, because it sounded like you skied and snowboarded at one point. Like Benny figured out snowboarding easy, it clicked, and he was just a snowboarder. You still did both for a while, but then the house fire happens, and then you had to make a choice. It was like, do I want to replace my skis or my snowboard? You decided you wanted to replace your snowboard, and you became a snowboarder. Is that accurate?
That is. And you know how long insurance takes, and, you know, we're trying to recoup our loss as best we can. And at that time, it was just very expensive to try to outfit everyone in our family. You know, you think about it, it's like you need socks, you need long underwear, you need pants, you need helmet, you need goggles, everything, something that you have obtained over many years. And now you're having to get everything all at once for 4 people. And then you're thinking skis and snowboards. It was just too much of an expense for my dad to do while we were trying to wait, you know, the fire inspector and insurance and everyone to come through to give us some money. But what was wonderful is the whole Stratton community came together. They supported us. It was right when, you know, I was starting to see about SMS and wouldn't it be cool to go there and apply there. So the first time that I was actually going to SMS, we weren't even in our house. We were having to rent because the house had burned down. So it was definitely very upsetting. It was just this collection of just random pieces of nostalgic Stratton items / bachelor pad, you know, / arcade. All the moms hated it. We learned that the moms hated it. But as a kid going to this house, like, this was an awesome house. It had all the sleds in the backyard for when, you know, we got home from the mountain, we could just keep playing outside for hours while the parents just relax. Like, you know, our generation of kids always was outside, rain or shine or snow, freezing weather, whatever. So that was hard. And, you know, my brother had decided he wanted to do snowboarding. So he asked my dad to get snowboard stuff. And I just wanted to be following what my brother was doing. So I picked snowboarding as well. And a lot of the local shops hooked us up with, you know, great discounts or gave us stuff because they all heard that our house burnt down and we had been going there for so long and they felt awful about it.
Now it's time for my first sponsor break, and I'm so stoked to have Club Med sponsor the podcast. And while some of you may be thinking, Club Med, isn't that for the best island vacations? Yes, while they offer the all-inclusive luxury experience in the islands, they're the only all-inclusive brand to offer mountain resorts globally. That's right, you can ditch the hassle of planning your ski vacation of a lifetime on your own and do it the Club Med way, and book one of their trips to the snowy peaks of Europe, Japan, China, or Canada. When you travel with Club Med, you'll enjoy unlimited lift tickets, lessons for all levels, delicious meals, and endless après ski fun, all included in the price. And while your kids are having a blast at the supervised children's clubs, you can focus on mastering your skiing or après skills and creating unforgettable memories. To make it all happen for you or your family, visit clubmed.us or call 1-800-CLUB-MED or your travel advisor to experience ski without limits. Next up, it's Elan Skis. I've been skiing on Elan, the Ripstick and the Playmaker, for the past 3 seasons. And when I first started doing ads for Elan, I would rave about the quality of the skis because you really can see a difference in the fit and finish from an Elan compared to every other ski on the wall. I'd always attribute that to Elan having the best factory in skiing, their heritage in building spare no-expense yachts, and having real skiers build the skis in the Slovenian Alps. That combination has created lively, playful skis that remain rock solid underfoot at high speeds and have really made me feel like I'm a better skier. And while it's not ski season, when it is, if you demo skis before you buy them, please support me in what I do and try an Elan, and you're going to see exactly what I'm talking about. If you buy skis without the test drive, trust me, and head on over to elanskis.com to see all the choices, and you're going to have more fun on the mountain than you ever have before next season. My final sponsor this round is Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, and they are your one-stop shop for getting out on the mountains, out on the water, out on the trail, and beyond. And they've been doing it for over 65 years. Peter Glenn doesn't make their own branded products that compete with established brands. They aren't trying to get you to stay in a hotel or go on a vacation. Peter Glenn is all about making sure that you have the best time possible outdoors. And they do that by having all the brands, all the products, and all the deals, both in-store and online. It's not about algorithms or AI. Peter Glenn is all about having the most knowledgeable staff who help you get what you need to get after it. So if you ski, snowboard, inline skate, wakeboard, water ski, or need outerwear for your adventure, Peter Glenn has all the answers. And they offer free shipping on orders over $50, a hassle-free return policy, and they'll price match reputable dealers. So please support this podcast and buy your stuff over at peterglenn.com. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. You get into snowboarding, you get a snowboard, and we're going to say that you progress pretty fast. And I think a big thing at Stratton was the Friday night races. And this is before you go to SMS. You're like 12 years old. Can you talk about how important those Friday night races at Stratton were to the development of you and your brother?
So it was not something that we were looking to be racing because we wanted to be noticed or we wanted to be moving up in the ranks. So this was when Boardercross was kind of still on the outskirts, but it was in, the Swatch series and things that Shaun Palmer was competing in. So we knew of this sport, and it was just incredible that Stratton every Friday night decided they want to do their little mini version of it. And it used to be on Tyrolia, which is not really even a hill anymore. It's kind of access for houses, but there used to be a little 2-person lift. It was the baby hill during the rest of the time. But on Friday night, they just have a cat. They'd roll some rollers, bank turns, like little jumps. And they just put a bunch of 4x4s in the ground as a start gate. Nothing official, nothing crazy, and then just had a bungee cord that would rip across to tell you to go. And then eventually when they got the drop gate, was just like, what is this? And it kind of brought us back to that movie Rad that my brother and I always grew up with, where they're racing on the BMX. Yes. And they're on hell track. And we were like, we're essentially experiencing our own version of hell track and what we want to do, and training with the boys and having to race with the boys because they just put me in the 12 and unders because they didn't have any other girls. So they're like, well, you're going to either race by yourself or we just throw you in the gate with the other couple of boys that were there. And at the end of the night, they're handing out prizes. They're doing a bunch of raffles. It was always like this big local experience, and all of the restaurants and the stores would always be giving swag. And it was always jam-packed it was called The Roost, the restaurant that was at the bottom of Tyrolia. And, there was the bar, so the parents could be all hanging out. They had the big cafeteria that they'd have open late, so you could still just be kind of all hanging out in this lodge environment late at night. So we'd get out of school, try to get up there for the race, and then have this like hangout spot until pretty much everything died out. But pros would be hanging out there, and they'd come like occasionally and race. And so you're like, oh my God, is somebody going to show up for that race that weekend and be in the pro division? And we get to be on the same course and race. And then I remember like winning coolers and gloves, and then it was just like stickers galore, and kids just went crazy for stickers. I don't know if they still do.
It's the coolest thing for a 12-year-old is to win free stuff, or just get free stuff is so cool. Being that you're winning it and you're at an event where there's a ton of people and all your peers there, that's got to be pretty awesome for you just to be a part of that.
Yeah, it was such an incredible environment. And then that was the kickoff to the weekend. You had this fun race under the lights, and then you're getting up early and you're back to the normal weekend shenanigans with the 3 families. We're trying to pick up right where we left off after the house burnt down. We're trying to get back into the racing. And, I think that's how also a lot of the community knew our family and the Shaw family and the Moore family, because we would participate in these races. And our families had been there for many years before, but that we started to always be in the scene and in the mix. It made it more of a family affair and connected you with the mountain in a different way.
And then connecting you with Stratton Mountain School, I mean, do you see and meet coaches when you're at these races, or just meet people from Stratton Mountain School and they see how well you're doing and they're like, hey, you might want to look into this program because you've got the talent to move forward? Does that kind of happen at those races when you're that young?
Well, yeah, and that was not what, again, we were looking for.
No, but it just happens.
Yeah, and that's where Andy Coghlan, a former pro,
legendary dude.
U.S. Open champ, he was coaching at Stratton Mountain School, and he had some of his kids racing in those age groups, and he saw my skill set and my daredevil side probably, and that's when he was like, hey, do you do any other races? if you're into this and you like this, you should sign up for the Green Mountain Series. And he's like, there's a race at Stratton, like tomorrow, you could sign up for it. And then Green Mountain Series also had Okemo and Bromley and Killington. So you'd be traveling around all these different spots. So even though we had avoided the Allegra program, I inevitably got into some sort of racing capacity. And then that's how Andy was saying, like, well, this is Stratton Mountain School. This is what we do. This is the overall goal. If it's something you're into, then, I can give you more information and look into it. And I did really well at those first couple of races. And, it helped put that idea in my mind that, like, ooh, this could be my thing. This could be what I'm striving to go for. This is definitely a unique and totally different path. And my parents were very open to do that because my brother loved football and baseball so much. So they were changing schools for him so he could get different opportunities with different teams for his endeavor. So it was definitely something that they were interested to figure out how to make that happen for myself.
And looking at Benny's LinkedIn, he went to Choate, which is today it's like 54 grand, and that's for a commuter. And then SMS today is like 48,000 for a commuter. Did your folks have to sacrifice a shit ton so you guys could have these things and go to these schools? Or was your dad just a total baller?
No, I wish. But I always thought, I was like, wow, SMS is like super, super expensive. But back in the late 90s, and I was like, yeah, late 90s, early 2000s when I was there, my brother, he did his post-grad at Choate, and then he went on to go to University of Vermont. And since we already had the house was getting rebuilt, it was ideal for us to then move and claim residency in Vermont. Therefore, my brother could get in-state tuition, and I would get in-state tuition for Stratton Mountain School. And then also with how spread out a lot of the school systems were in Vermont, I think the other option for myself for high school would have been Burton, which I think was probably a 50-minute drive away. So there was also an incentive, and the town gave some money to my dad to send me to Stratton Mountain School. And so that at the time, I think out of pocket, my dad was maybe paying $5,000.
Oh, wow. That's great.
Per year for me to go to Stratton Mountain School. And that was still a lot because on top of my brother going to college, that was another added expense. But it's a little crazy how expensive school has become in our country. Yeah, it's quite unfortunate, actually. But I don't think my parents would have had the opportunity to send me to Stratton Mountain School if that wasn't the case.
And then if they weren't able to send you to Stratton Mountain School, that would mean that you wouldn't have every single day on snow to be able to refine your craft and get better at doing what you do. And maybe you wouldn't have had the career that you've had, because a lot of people who go to these schools, it really does develop their talent. And I think for you, by the time you're a freshman or a sophomore at Stratton Mountain School is when you established your U.S. dominance on Boardercross or Snowboardcross. You have 4 FIS wins or FIS wins. You go to X-Games, you go to the U.S. Open. And that year, what was the biggest highlight of that 2000-2001 season for you?
I would probably say the U.S. Open at Stratton. That was like the really big Boardercross event. The previous year, the year 2000, was my first time at that event, and it scared the shit out of me because the course was massive. The jumps were the biggest I'd ever really seen or experienced. And so that year in 2001, I kind of knew what I was getting into and practiced going off bigger jumps and was a little bit more emotionally and physically prepared for the task at hand. And I actually won the US Open at 15. And it was kind of this like homegirl hero thing, but it didn't come without like, it had this like negative shine on it because a lot of the European athletes boycotted the event and they didn't actually race because they didn't like the course. They thought the course was too dangerous. But in my mind, there's no quit. Even now to this day, I have to have my coaches pull me from competition because I will never pull myself. It's almost a little dangerous, but
you're always ready to go.
Yeah, I will always put myself in the gate. And it's really important for the medical staff and coaches to realize when it is not safe for me to get into the gate. So I think that was just instilled on me as a little kid, with my brother constantly pushing me like, you got this, you've been training for it. And in my mind, I had been training for the big jumps. I knew that something crazy like this would happen. This was a TV event. They wanted crazy things. And, this event was competing with X Games that was started in Crested Butte and was then at Mount Snow. So those were the levels that this event was trying to rise to. And in my mind, yes, this course scared me, but it wasn't ever a question that I was going to quit. It was just like, okay, I have to figure out how to get through it. And it caught me by surprise that the girls were coming up to me and saying that they wanted to split the prize money, that they wanted to boycott and not do this event. And I was like, no, that's definitely not happening. And I believe it was me, myself, and all the US girls competed and the Canadian girls competed. I remember Erin Simmons was there. And that was when I first started to see like the Troy Lee helmets, the full face. And that's what Palmer was racing. And you're like, oh, those guys you just looked more intimidating, because I had like the Brico Boeri helmet. So it was a little like goofy. So to then come back and to have the full face and to have all that in my mind, I was a completely different person in that year of growth within this sport and was ready to take on what this course had to offer. That was a big turning point in my career, because that got me an invite to X Games.
That's your first X Games that you go to. But in thinking of winning that US Open, it's the biggest event in East Coast snowboarding. I mean, Burton has so much history in New England, and you're living and riding in Burton's backyard. And I know that you're on Palmer for a long time, and Kessler and other brands. Were you ever on Burton? Because I would think that they would want you, being that you live right there.
I was on Burton, and I rode Burton boards. I raced on the Burton Balance for many years, Terje's.
Yeah, I remember that one.
I had the white one. Like, oh God, I loved that board. And that was the same board that I jump into the halfpipe with. It's not how it is now that all of these boards are so specialized and unique and specific to the discipline. One board, you just had it for all the disciplines. You're doing GS, until I started to get into like a GS shaped board. In the beginning of my career, I was doing soft boots for everything.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I was on Burton boards for a while, and I can't remember when I got on to Palmer snowboards. And then I was with Kessler probably after 2006. Because Palmer snowboards didn't want me. And that's not Shaun Palmer himself. He was very much not associated with the company anymore and kind of lost his rights and his name around that company, which was unfortunate. And another athlete that has an incredible story. So if you ever have a chance to talk to him, and I'm sure he's got probably some sort of crazy life story coming out in a book, which would be well worth, because the shenanigans he's gotten into and how incredible of an athlete he is with all different sports, summer, winter, it's just incredible. And it was always so much fun to be traveling on tour with him. And when my brother wasn't on tour, Shaun became the new big brother. And all the other guys on my team were like the big brothers. They were the Benny when Benny couldn't be there. And they happily took on that role to push me, and they knew how they could push me to get me better and to make me fearless, which was always a pretty special moment for me. So to have these like high-ranking, incredible athletes that you've looked at from afar and totally are enamored with their ability, all of a sudden just naturally become your big brothers. So it was kind of a wonderful memory to look on.
While it's no surprise that you would be on Palmer because of how badass your snowboarding is, just thinking of his image and how he does things, you're not the person who's going to be up getting shit-faced till 3 a.m. and then wake up and win a race the next day. You're not the person that's going to be up at 3 a.m. fighting somebody and then racing the next morning, but he is, and he's always been able to do that. And are there any good Palmer stories where you're just like, I can't believe he's able to do this and actually compete and win?
Well, I didn't know him during those phases, but it was just a different world. The action sports industry was so new and so booming. these guys could act like rock stars and then just get up and do it again. You're in your 20s, your body doesn't hurt you the same way. You just send it. And these guys were putting these sports on the map. So of course they could do whatever the hell they wanted and make a name for themselves. And that worked. And that was great. As I was coming up in the ranks, the sport was changing. And I was also a younger female. And my dad wasn't exactly just going to be like, yeah, I'm going to let you travel on tour by yourself with all of these guys that are in their mid to late 20s and you're 17. So in the early years, I wouldn't be able to go to every single race on tour. I'd pick and choose. My dad would usually go with me so he could be there for any, medical emergencies to watch, as he'd always been my coach. So it felt nice, even though I had the US team coaches at the time. It was just a different tempo. It was a different environment of traveling and how you're getting from point A to point B. It's not just showing up in your car with your parents and they drop you off for, softball practice. And then they come pick you up. You are away. So my dad was like, we're going to figure this out. And, we're going to see how this evolves and see how we navigate this new world. But after, I would say, even my early years on tour, I'd win races. I'd be just tired and I just want to go back and have some food and watch a movie. And most of the guys, went out partying, but they were never like, oh, come party and do crazy shit with us, because they're like, yeah, she's young. She's not into doing that. Like they were just very much like the big brothers that also didn't want the young sister around in those moments. So they weren't going to try to influence me to do something else.
It's time for my second round of sponsors, and I'm going to start with Outdoor Research. While I love that they sponsor my podcast, I've been wearing OR gear since I moved to Seattle in 2000. I started with one of their rain jackets, as if you live in Seattle and don't own one, you're doing things wrong. And based on how amazing that jacket worked for me, Outdoor Research gear is the only outerwear I've bought with my own money. And I've been privileged over the years. I get a lot of free stuff, but I've still bought my gear from OR because it's the best. These days, while they've brought in new designers and the styles and the cuts have gotten cooler and more my style, one thing that won't change is the quality. That's the reason you see course skiers and snowboarders, climbers, and now mountain bikers swearing by OR. Because if you want the best, head on over to outdoorresearch.com to see what I'm talking about. Next up, it's Best Day Brewing. And if you're like me, you love having a cold one, but you don't have the time for the alcohol to slow you down. That's where Best Day comes in. Think all the flavor of your favorite beer, whether that be a Kolsch, a hazy IPA, a Mexican lager, the Shandy, or the brand new Pilsner, which is quickly becoming my favorite Best Day. And they come guilt-free, as Best Day has a fraction of the calories of your regular beer, they won't stop you from driving anywhere, and you won't be hungover in the morning. And for people who drink beer with alcohol, here is my secret trick to extending my night. Mix in a Best Day every couple drinks, and you'll find yourself to be more coherent, more fun, and primed to have your best day or night ever. Trust me, it definitely works. And to find out more about Best Day, head on over to bestdaybrewing.com or buy some on Amazon. My final sponsor this round is Stanley, and they've been supporting this podcast for years before they became the hottest brand in America. Why did I want to work with Stanley? Because Stanley's products are light years better than the competition. While everyone knows about their quencher, which is everywhere, I swear by their adventure stacking beer pint glasses, and I use them every day. And when ski season comes around, I use Stanley's food jars and lunch boxes and bring them to the mountain to save me from buying $25 burgers. It's the ultimate saving money hack at the mountain. And Stanley's the brand that invented the category of keeping things hot and cold, and they've been doing it for over 100 years, so you know you're getting the best when you buy a Stanley. To find out more about all their products and collections, head on over to stanley1913.com. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. 2001, 2002, it's an Olympic year. They're having the games in Salt Lake City, and halfpipe is one of the most anticipated events of the games. And at this point, while you're racing well, you're not lighting the world on fire pipe-wise, but you're still doing okay. How did you end up getting a forerunning spot at the Utah Olympics?
I was training in halfpipe as well because I was doing all of the events, and there was a couple of girls on Stratton Mountain School team at the time, Liz Tierzik and I'm blanking on my other teammates right now. And they came in and they had like a different freestyle background. And I had this race. And so you see the elegance and the different flair that these girls were bringing and coming into the halfpipe. And so then we travel over to Okemo because Okemo had like the early season halfpipe, because being on the East Coast, we really wouldn't see a halfpipe start to take shape until the time around late February into March as it was prepping for the US Open.
Yep.
So if we wanted to get into the pipe, we went to Okemo. And if we're at Okemo, I'm running into Hannah Teeter, and Kelly Clark would also be there because she'd be coming from Mount Snow. Those are the places. So you start to lap the pipe with those ladies. You're on the T-bar with them. Now you have a new bar that you are seeing physically with your eyes. And now you're also in the mix and lapping. So then you constantly have this new carrot that's being dangled in front of you. So the new thing was girls spinning above the lip, doing 540s, especially for my age group. And, I think my coach, Scott Palmer, had dropped my name into potentially being a forerunner. And a lot of people had kind of the same reaction as you, like, oh, you're not known for this. Like, you do boardercross and racing. Like, why are you there? And then when I was coming through the pipe, I was starting to showcase some of the spins that I was doing. And that was like, oh, that's why, because she's putting herself in there in the mix. And that's a very faint memory that I have of that moment. But yeah, that was a totally different experience to then get in like the Olympic cycle and to get the bib and be practicing in the half pipe. And we had to practice all these scenarios for even the ski patrol. So we'd pretend to fall and they'd have to come to us and figure out how to help us the most efficient way and get us off out of the way and clear the pipe. And then they're slipping and we're having to play out all of these different scenarios. But then we got a bib and a credential and felt like it was just our like golden ticket that we could just be ripping around all of the different corrals and go everywhere. And then people are wanting our autograph because they see that we have a bib. And we're like, we're not really anyone like that cool, but if you want it, they're like, no, we still want it. I was like, okay, you said it, not me. I remember Hannah and I were just on cloud 9 experiencing that and getting to cruise around and see all that was happening.
So you get to do that. And then at the end of that season, you compete in your first FIS Boardercross event and you win that. Then you win the Junior World Championships. And while you've always crushed the race world, it used to be only slalom and GS. And does the tight, more rubbing is racing action of snowboard cross bring you back to the kind of riding you did on those Friday night races? Or why do you think snowboard cross kind of fit your riding perfectly?
I always just felt because it went back to how I grew up with my brother. Like my brother was always setting the pace and the tone, and I had to rise to that. I always had a hard time just doing GS and slalom because I really never knew how fast I could truly push myself. So I get on the podium occasionally, but I started to do better when it was the head-to-head competitions. And parallel GS and slalom didn't come in until a little bit later. Once we had that at Junior Worlds down in New Zealand, and I could actually see my competitor in my peripheral, that's when I'd find a different gear. So I think that's why it translated so easily with Boardercross, because you could hear people around you, you could see people, or if someone was in front of you, it was like my brother leading the way and I'm having to try to catch him.
That totally makes sense.
It would light this fire within me and get me that extra energy and that extra gear, because I could always be like, yeah, I'm kind of tired. Like, I don't know how fast to really push myself going down a GS course by myself. But then all of a sudden you have somebody in front of you, you have a goal that is physically being put in front of you. It was a lot easier for me to rise to that occasion.
So you have this junior Boardercross title one year and you're killing it there. Then you win the half-pipe title the next year in the juniors. And at that moment in time, what was more fun with you? Was it the win-at-all-costs mentality of racing or the creative element of the judged event?
I loved doing both, honestly. Again, it kind of goes back to me being a young kid, and there was more girls in the freestyle component because, the girls could dress cuter, they could be listening to music and have their own expression within the sport. And so when I was traveling with the girls, whether it was when we were younger at SMS or on the US team, the energy was just totally different. And it was like me being a young girl playing with dolls and having that different like female camaraderie and friendship. And then having the head-to-head race mentality with the guys because there wasn't a lot of girls doing Boardercross. So it then suited my environment when it was just Benny and I. So I liked going back and forth and experiencing both of those environments nonstop. It helped balance everything out. When it was too intense and it was too much masculine energy, I'd go over to halfpipe and find my own rhythm and create my own line and create my own run that was unique to myself, not just follow this and do this and do it like a guy.
So when you win your first World Cup event, because you do that in halfpipe in Chile in like 2003, and that's like a holy shit moment. You don't win it, you take second, but either way, you get your first big podium there. And is your headspace at that point, like, do you see yourself riding at the Olympics in halfpipe in 2006? Because I don't even think Boardercross has been announced yet. But is that the focus? Like, if I want to go to the Olympics, it's all halfpipe?
I think Boardercross was announced to be in the Olympics because I would have graduated earlier that year in May.
Okay.
It still wasn't like Olympics is the trajectory from a very young age. And my parents were like, this is just a really interesting opportunity. Like, let's see where she can take it. If it doesn't work out, she'll get back on the regular path to college and do that. So it was always just this apply to college, keep deferring for 10 years as I'm, it was just not the traditional plan because it was just a very unique path that no one in my family really had experienced. I had a cousin that was very serious into figure skating, and that was a different path. And we had some other family members that went to Air Force or West Point, and those seemed to deviate off the traditional path for school. So we had some of those moments where our family could be like, oh, how are you doing this? What are you doing with school? But there wasn't this path that was just designed. And my parents really were open to seeing where's this going to take her. So let's just find that out because you could always go to school. Your body can't always be doing this at this level. Cut to me still doing it 39. But I mean, that was their thought. They're like, you're not going to be able to do this forever, because my dad got injured in college and blew his knee. They didn't know how to fix knees back then. So his mindset was like, hey, you're healthy, you're young, like do this because you don't know how long you could do it for.
I mean, I believe that mindset, but like you said, you're an anomaly where you're still going, which is absolutely crazy. And thinking about your X Games career, we're not going to talk about X Games too much because we have so much other shit to talk about, but you won that event 10 times. You got your first win in 2003. Your medal is legal drinking age today. It is 21 years old. And when you were younger, winning those medals in Aspen, there had to be some huge nights. And it doesn't have to be early in your career, but what was the most fun night in Aspen after winning a gold or just in general? Do you have a big party night? Because I know that's not your forte to send it, but I'm sure there must have been one night after a win.
I'm trying to remember how old I was when I was sponsored by Monster because you could go and you could get into the Monster party. I think I was legal drinking age at that point, but in my early years when I was very, very young, racing took a lot out of me. So I was so mentally fatigued. My reward became afterwards really to just decompress. It wasn't to be like, I won, it's now time to get shit-faced. I didn't have that drive yet to party. I felt like very reserved. I almost felt a little childish or immature that I was not ready to have those like experiences. So after X Games and the first win there, I remember just going to a restaurant. So my brother wasn't at this X Games. It was just my dad and I. And we went to this restaurant called the Motherlode. I don't even know if it's still there, but they had like the best steaks, and we had it the night before. My dad's like, "What do you want to do? You just want to," I was like, "I want to go back to the Motherlode and have a steak and potatoes and just relax and just like be in a darker like pub environment and to just shut down my brain." Then the next day, maybe go shopping. And then my dad and I rode Aspen and the Highlands and did the whole rest, because I wasn't doing half pipe and slopestyle at that time. I just went for Boardercross. So we had a different way to experience and to extend our stay, because the X Games were all weekend and my race was just on Saturday. So we had all of Sunday to just kick it and experience this whole new area. So it wasn't until I was like on the US team and we're traveling with other teammates and I'm not lodging with my dad to do that kind of like party afterwards and have some drinks after a race.
Okay. But we'll get back to the actual racing part of your career. And 03-04, that season starts a crazy run for you. I mean, leading up to the 2006 Olympics from there, you're pretty much top 10 in every World Cup you enter. You're top 5 70% of the time. You have 10 or so wins. And I was going to count your podiums, but there was just too many. And I'll just say you had a shit ton of podiums. And while no one can touch you in snowboard cross, was there a real chance for you to make the Olympic halfpipe team too? Because you had some good results going into 2006.
I did have great results, but we also had the strongest contingency for the U.S. We had Gretchen Blyther, we had Hannah, we had Kelly, we had Trish, we had Elena Height.
Yeah.
And then, Claire Bedez, like all of us were going for those 4 spots. So knowing that Trish and Kelly were already Olympians from 2002, they had that higher level. Trish had very technical runs and she had a lot of amplitude. Kelly was just going massive and had like big spins, high consequence. Like we saw the level that we were at, and it's like, God, like I'm almost there. If I have a great day, I'm almost there. And I had a great finish in Mountain Creek, New Jersey, because the weather was shitty. And nobody who was a professional snowboarder really knew how to capitalize in those like slushy, gross conditions that were just, it happened to rain and it was just slow. So everyone had a hard time carrying speed. But I was like, oh, I'm from the East Coast. Like, this is my jam. So I finished really well there. But since I didn't do well in some of the other events, I think it hurt me overall. And I remember just missing the cut when they announced the team after, I think it was the Grand Prix. I think it was the Chevy Grand Prix in Mountain Creek. Yeah, I was just shy of getting on there. And so they put me as an alternate because I was already going for Boardercross. I wouldn't be taking up a quote unquote extra spot as a counting athlete because they can only take so many athletes fully for all 3 events. So I wouldn't be taking another spot for halfpipe, even though I would be registered as a backup. So it was hard to navigate that. But my parents were like, just go and focus on one event because it's a lot. And it was starting to be challenging to do multiple disciplines at one location because you're training, then you're competing one, then you're getting up, then you're competing again, where most people are just doing that one training and competition at that one location. And I was doing that rotation 2 to 3 times, depending on if there was slopestyle and halfpipe there. So it started to actually hurt me in the long run with X Games because they went to the live format and I was having to do qualifiers for slopestyle and then race later that day for Boardercross. And it was starting to wear on me where I'd get really tired and I'd crash and I'd hurt myself. So after, I believe, 2003, I dropped slopestyle. So then I was like, okay, I can still do 2 events because halfpipe women's would be Friday night and Boardercross race would be Saturday during the day. So I'd have plenty of time to recoup and get recovered before competing.
Okay, so you do end up making the snowboard cross team. And leading up to the games, you were so dominant, there was no doubt that you were going to make the team. You're getting a ton of press leading up to the games too because you're expected to medal. Does that create extra pressure for you?
I think so, because I had already put the pressure on myself, but now I felt like I was under this microscope where now more people are learning about my sport and now watching out for me as the Olympics creep closer and closer. And as a kid, I always wanted to be a part of the Olympics in some capacity. Never knew what it was going to be for, but I remember growing up watching Peekaboo Street, and my mom's like, one day you could go to the Olympics. If you found something that you loved and you trained really hard, you could be marching in with Team USA. You always be an Olympian for life. And that was just like that sparkle and that image that you had in your mind. They're like, yeah, I could do that. And look at it. It's Team USA and their special outfits. And like, you could recognize them from a mile away. You knew which country was which at the Olympics. And that was always what really stood out in my mind watching Olympics. So then now you're then thinking like, wow, now I'm actually a part of this. And it becomes a little bit more real, becomes a little bit more intense.
Before I dive deep into the Olympics, I usually talk about sponsors and money in these podcasts because it's something that's interesting to me. And I would think by at this point, you probably have a long list of sponsors, but you've had so many sponsors that we're not going to be able to talk about all your sponsors. So I would think you're getting paid at this point. Going into that first Olympics, are all financial concerns gone and you just worry about snowboarding?
You know, my dad was pretty influential in my contracts. I did have an agent, but my dad and my agent kind of worked together and they wanted to take the business out of snowboarding. So they kind of take care of all those things. So I don't even remember all of the actual monetary influence that was around. I just knew, you know, what my obligations were, what I had to do for specific sponsors, what appearances, what sticker, like whatever, because that's what it was in the earlier days.
So you didn't see the prices of the stickers? Would your dad handle all that? Or like Visa came in and they said they wanted to give you 50 grand for the Olympics. Was your dad an agent handling that? And you just knew you had to put a sticker on your helmet?
I honestly can't remember if there was a specific dollar amount. The only time I remember hearing a dollar amount was after 2006. And it was when Palmer had dropped me and they were withholding money that they had owed me. And then once I like really realized it and absorbed like all of that, then that was like, wow, this is upsetting, you know. And I think that's what my dad was ultimately trying to avoid. I think he was really making sure that I was having the moment of being a kid, because I started that, you know, at like 15, and 17 was when I started having a lot of success. And now we're 19, 20 years old at the 2006 Olympics. Like, my dad is helping me manage that without hopefully not having all of that pressure. And I think that's what he was trying to do, was alleviate some of that pressure that he knew would inevitably be on me. And it's like, you know, I see now these young athletes that come in for summer and winter, and I'm just like, oh my God, they're so young. And I know what it was like to be 20, and some of these athletes are even younger than that. And, you know, I just hope someone's looking out for them and their best interest, because it's a lot to manage.
It totally is. I'm going to get into the Olympic Games now. We'll talk about the games before you compete, because after you compete, it's a different story. What's your Olympic highlight? Were the opening ceremonies something that was just totally mind-blowing?
So I remember 2006 and having that whole build up and lining up. I mean, it's a lot of hurry up and wait. So you see like every athlete walking out in this parade, but we're lined up like hours before, and they've made us rush. And then we're like underneath some walkway in a big stadium, and we're just waiting in line. And so, but during that time, you're talking with everyone. It feels like still time is standing still, because you're trying to realize like where you are, and you have all the pins, and the pins are like you're bartering and trading and trying to find all the different countries and get the most unique looking thing. So then you have leverage to trade something else. So that like kid energy takes over. and you kind of forget everything else. And then you're like, oh, we're walking. I only did the first loop walk because I wanted to get on the bus because I had training the next day. So I didn't want a super late night out. So I didn't get the full experience of the opening ceremonies because they said you could get on the early bus and leave. Turns out we sat on the bus, a lot of the early people, and we sat there during the whole time the whole ceremony was going off, and we never left. So we were kind of bummed about that because we could see it on the TV and we were watching. We're like, oh, we were told we would be leaving. So we ended up kind of leaving all at the same time. So I didn't get to actually watch 2006. And that was probably just, a logistical error. There's just so many things happening. But I do remember that. So you get home probably like 2 a.m, and then you go to sleep, and then you get up and ready for training on the course. And I can't remember how many days. We might have had 2 days of training on the course. I honestly can't remember.
No, it's all right.
Several years ago. Can't really quite remember.
No, and I'm going to talk about the race very quickly. You had a huge lead. You did a method on the last air. You crashed, and you took silver. And when you cross the finish line before the outside world explodes, what goes through your head?
I mean, I'm telling myself, what the hell did you do? Like, where did that come from? Like, why did you decide to do that? And I'm desperately reaching for an answer because I ultimately didn't understand. And it took me years of therapy to try to understand what happened in that moment. And all that we could come to understand was that it was just this reaction of an immature mind, of this excitement that just took over without thinking things through. Like me blasting through the door late for class, not knowing, could somebody be on the other side and I'm endangering them? Like, it's that thought process that you're just not fully aware of your consequences when you're young. And a lot of kids can get away with it because they don't have a lot of high consequential moments in their lives. Mine just happened to be on the world stage in front of the entire snowboarding community, world, whoever was watching. And that's what made it extremely hard for myself, because not truly understanding why I did that and then having to live with that and trying to work through that setback until 16 years later.
Yeah, I mean, it's great that we have the redemption story. I feel like it's the only reason I would even talk about it in the podcast. The thing is, if you land that method, Todd Richards is going to say that what you did represents the heart and soul of snowboarding, and somewhere Tara J's going to be smiling like, yeah, she fucking did it. But instead, Todd calls you a showboat. The whole world follows his lead. And not that I want to call Todd out because he's the best, and especially on the mic. But this was pre-social media, and he was the authoritative, seasoned snowboarder's voice. And was that commentary a big deal, or do you not even think about any of that?
I mean, that was hurtful to be getting that from a fellow snowboarder, someone who could be physically putting themselves in that situation and understand why. And I've done some commentating in my career for snowboarding as well as surfing. And what I always do is empathize with the athlete and appreciate what the athlete has done. And a lot of the times shit happens and the opportunity doesn't happen. Things don't line up, but it's never like, how could they do this? And it's because of the experience I had. I would never want to put that on another athlete because it's hard enough. It is hard enough to be an athlete, to be representing your country, be performing at that perfect 1% and be looking for those minute details that are going to set you ahead of someone else. And really in that moment, I embraced my sport for what it was, and that freeing moment, that expression, everything that snowboarding represented. And yeah, it was definitely pretty upsetting to get that kickback from someone in my fellow community. But I know to this day, Shaun Palmer says like that was the sickest thing ever. And he was so proud of me, and he's gotten in fights defending me in bars still to this day. And I know I upset a lot of people and disappointed a lot of people, but at the end of the day, it's just like, it wasn't you. You were not physically in that moment. I never understood why people got so angry or so offended.
Why'd they
when
care,
it
right?
wasn't them.
Yeah.
Why do you care so much? And that's even become more toxic in the social media world and landscape that we live today. People are too involved with other people's lives instead of focusing how to better themselves and to improve their situation, because then that helps improve the world around them. So that was always the hardest thing that I'd be working through, trying to tell friends, trying to tell family why I was still struggling with this. And back then, having mental strength and working through those challenges, that was not really talked about. That wasn't an option because, if you had these mental weaknesses, if you want to call it, it was not like, oh, this is mental strength. It was the opposite end of that spectrum would be really bad. So there was never anything in between that they were looking at. They were like, oh, I want to improve that. I want to see how I can get better with that. It was always just work on your physical strengths, train for that. You train over and over and over again, and you'll have a closer chance to repeat perfection if you've done it so many times, and never looking at the mental side of how that could help, if that makes sense.
No, it does. It does. And I can't even imagine what kind of impact it has on your self-esteem and self-worth at that point when you're like 20 years old. You said you went through a ton of therapy, and I was trying to think of my reaction to when I saw it. And I couldn't really think of it, but I'm sure I was kind of like, can you fucking believe that? But it wasn't like I was mad at you or anything. It was just like, I knew that you would probably need therapy after that because it's so disappointing to you. But you almost became a villain of the games to other people, which is crazy because you're the one who worked so hard for 4 years to get to that point, or longer than 4 years. And unfortunately, it affects you. It sucks that other people think that they have the ability to just project their pissed offness on you because you didn't win a goal. But what pisses me off even more is that some sponsors looked at you as bad press and dropped you. It sounds like Palmer could have been one of those. I don't know. You said they dropped you in 2006, so I'd think that. But who are the other brands, and how much does that shit cost you?
Honestly, I think I have blocked that out mentally, and I don't know exactly, but I do remember Palmer Snowboards, and this is when Shaun Palmer was not involved with them at all, so it was not him doing that. Because Shaun has always been someone who has had my back and have always loved the energy that I had in the spirit, especially since 2006, because it was kind of like that bad boy energy, like, F you doesn't matter, I'll do what I want. The guys kind of always got away with that. I felt like I wasn't given that by and that way out. So I kind of had to just face the music, and I was torn apart by it. And I wasn't paid from what Palmer Snowboards had owed me. And I had, because I still had a medal. So in my contract, you can get bonuses if you have that in your contract. Or if you medal, you are entitled to X amount in bonuses. And they backed out of all of it. And we tried to take them to court, but they were international. And then they said, okay, we'll settle. We'll give you this amount. And then they never ended up giving me anything. And my dad, at the end of the day, was just like, you know what, we're dropping it. It's not going to be good for yourself mentally to keep going after these people, because they could come back and sue us for defamation of character. I think they were trying to play the angle that she made Palmer Snowboards look bad because she fell on a Palmer snowboard, and that could have been the reason why she fell, instead of just someone who made a mistake and just fell and lost their balance. I don't know what kind of angle they were just going for, but my dad just kind of removed myself, and we kind of just moved on to the next. And that's when Kessler Snowboards out of Switzerland took a chance and wanted to make me boards. And I was very excited for that opportunity, because then I almost felt like I had to rebuild my image from scratch, as if I was someone that was just new on the circuit and had to get into this cycle of constantly prove my value and my worth. And I have to win and win. And winning became the only way I could validate myself and make myself feel better. And for the longest time, that was a very, very toxic cycle to be in, because that totally is not the best way to balance and see your self-worth.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it took a lot, and it took so many years for me to then see those patterns and how unhealthy those were, and then try to repattern myself and retrain myself mentally. And it didn't always affect me because I was still always winning. So in my mind, in my coach's mind, team mind, they're like, nothing's wrong. You're performing. It was just a goofball mistake. It was just something that happened. Move on. Because every Olympic cycle would come through and I'd get bombarded with the same story, with the same narrative over and over again. And you're like, oh my gosh. It's like they don't look at anything else that I've accomplished in the sport or keep winning. They can only come back to this moment where yes, it is a moment in my history, but it is not the only moment in my history. And that was also very, very frustrating and fatiguing. So I had to be having this like whole mask and prepare to be facing the media every Olympic cycle. It took so much energy that could be better used to compete and execute my skill set. And it felt like Team USA media was thwarting me around every turn. So that was always very frustrating. And then every time the Olympics were over with, it was like this weight taken off of me. Like, it's over, it's done. And like, that's pretty sad. That's not the feeling you want as an Olympian. So as I was seeing this pattern develop, I was like, if I'm still doing this, something has to change. Either I need to leave the sport. Is that what I really want to do? Then I'd have some time away from the sport and reevaluate and be like, no, I definitely love this sport. I definitely love pushing myself in this capacity. And I want to see how far I could take myself. But what else needs to be changed? How am I going to make this situation better for myself? So that's when I started to look into the mental capacity, because it's the only thing I hadn't executed. I've always done the physical side, get yourself physically ready in the gym, training on snow. But the mental was just never something that we looked at. And it was not something that our team was really into looking at quite yet, because it just wasn't a popular topic. And since I was still performing and winning, they're not thinking anything's wrong. So I wasn't doing myself any favors at that time.
No, I mean, you were winning everything except for, it seemed like when you went to the Olympics, there must have been something in your head. Because, I mean, there was the Canada Olympics and then there was Sochi. You made the final, I think, in Vancouver. I don't know if you made it in Sochi, but both of these games, you're killing it at the World Cup level leading up to it, and then you really don't do that well at the Olympics, so I'm guessing things get in your head. We don't have enough time to talk about that because we got a lot more shit to go, and we don't have that much time. I told you we'd do an hour and a half. So then you go to your fourth games in Korea. I don't think you were as dominant on the World Cup, but you still make the team for that one. You end up in fourth place at that Olympics, and you'd already started your sports psych kind of stuff and getting your head in the right place. But going into the COVID Olympics, this is the one that's the full circle moment. Do you do anything different to prepare for the Olympics? Or do you do anything different on site at the Olympics because you've been doing the same thing over and over and it's time to change it? Or what's in your head going into China?
Well, I actually broke my arm months before the Olympics. I was doing interval training on my skateboard, hanging out with my brother. And we hadn't seen each other a long time. And it's just like, it was just nice to be kind of hanging out in that capacity again. Like, he had kids, COVID shut everything down. We weren't able to see each other. Everyone was so isolated, and we're outside and I was getting tired. But, again, that like kid moment comes into play, that it's like, you're ignoring those signs that, you're fatiguing, but you're having so much fun. You want to keep playing. And, had like a little wobble and hit a little stone that was in the pump track. And since I was tired, I just didn't have the same strength left to really correct myself. And the way I fell, I tried to roll out of it, but I was like, man, my elbow really hurts. And you have all this adrenaline happening and you can't really figure out what's wrong fully. So I just sit there, keep myself calm and try to diagnose myself. And I tried to do a push-up and I was like, something's wrong. Like, this sucks. So I had to then completely change my mindset, because it was about getting surgery, getting healthy, getting strong again. And maybe it was a great distraction. I'm not sure. There was just so many things different going into this Olympic cycle, because the world was shut down. We had to be getting tested every other day for COVID. We're only in tiny bubbles. We're not having friends and family gathering, any holidays, anything like that. You're just completely cut off from the world. But you're like, well, hopefully this can't last forever. And my goal is, only a couple months away, and, maybe life will go back to normal after that. And during the shutdown, I was like, well, I'll go back to school and I'll train to be a personal trainer. That way I have something to fall back on, because I'm thinking this is probably going to be my last go, and just try to utilize time and capitalize on what I could at home. And going to Korea, I had a different mindset. And so this was several years after working with my mental coach, Janice Schull from Rethink Group. And I kind of had this like revelation that I was like, you know what? It's my 5th Olympics. I'm going to enjoy this one this time around, because the others hadn't been enjoyable. I'm always having to jump through hoops for media, go to this interview, do this, wear this, because those people paid to have their outfit seen. And those are the things general spectators don't realize, that it's like this orchestrated event all the time. You're walking through Olympic Village, you have Olympic apparel, you have media apparel, you have your podium apparel. Everything is all picked out from you the entire time. You would not even need to bring any of your own clothes when you pack. You just need to bring your equipment, because everything else is provided for you. And I just told myself, I'm not doing media before. I'm honoring myself, and I want to have this for myself. And I want to change my feelings around the Olympics. That was my main goal. And I had to tell myself, even if I don't win, I'm a 5-time Olympian. Like, that's nothing to be ashamed about. And I might not win, and I will be okay. And that was something that was said to me years before by a friend. And I almost couldn't really even accept that truth at that time, because I'm like, what are you talking about? You're telling one of the most competitive people in the world it's okay not to win. Like, that doesn't compute. Like,
Yeah.
don't say that to me. Like, how dare you? But then it settled in, and it settled in at the right time, that it's like, it will be okay. And you're just going to take one round at a time. You've been through a lot. You've had multiple knee surgeries. You've had surgery on your hand. You've had surgery on your arm. Your arm is still not at its best pulling out of this gate. But for some reason that day, my knee didn't hurt. My elbow didn't hurt, even though it was really cold. And most of the time when things are really cold, that's when all of your joints that have had any sort of issue hurt.
Yeah.
But it was just weird. It was like the stars had finally aligned after 16 years of ups and downs and wins and losses and injuries and all these different setbacks. And it makes me have a totally different appreciation for when other athletes win and have their moment, because it's just like, yes, all the athletes are capable of winning, and they've made it to this level for that specific reason. But what is going to make the difference on this specific day? It's going to be a lot of little tiny factors have to come into play, and you can't always control all those tiny factors. That's why it is so hard for athletes of this caliber, and that they have to have that level of acceptance at that time, that it's like, I did the best I could today, and it just didn't come together. But that was really hard to put that to a younger mind for myself. I couldn't really accept that. And once I did, it made my whole Olympic experience that much more enjoyable.
I mean, it sounds like so many different people that I've had on this podcast who didn't succeed in certain contests or events. And we talk about it and they're like, I just had so much pressure on myself, and I did this and this and this, and I was thinking about winning. And then they finally get to a point in their career where we're like, I've done this 12 times and I don't even care anymore. I'm just here and I'm going to have fun. And that's when it all kind of comes together for them. And it sounds like that happened for you. And I can imagine it's like the most incredible experience of your life when you get to hear the national anthem because you have won. Is it just tears of joy just streaming down your face?
I mean, it is that moment that I have wanted in my life for a very, very long time. And then to be handed the flag in the perfect, beautiful triangle when it's folded up and handed to you. And then to be up there accepting your medal. And I think I was up there and I was like, you know what? Everyone gets really emotional. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to get emotional. because it's just, again, me wanting to have that like little rebellious streak, and just me want to just like, I'm standing here because it's all come together finally. And, I don't want to miss a moment of this, feeling all these different emotions. I want to be as present as possible, and looking around and seeing my coaches and seeing my teams and seeing other athletes and teams that they're supporting other people, and to really fully take it in. It was just a totally different environment as well, because there were no people there.
Yeah.
So it was not like a ghost town. There still were a lot of people, but it was not the same magnitude like in years past. And, it didn't bum me out or bother me in any ways. It was just something that was different that I noticed.
So does that mean that you might give it another run to go to another Olympics to try to win a gold with a huge crowd there?
I mean, a lot of people have told me, they're like, hey, it's back in Italy, so many years later. And I'm like, do I really need to prove anything else? I don't. But right now I'm just taking one year at a time, seeing how my body feels. Just, I want to not be doing it just to do it. I'm looking at what potentially transitioning out of sport looks like, what other interests I want to really venture into. I do love event production, and I do really like broadcasting for sports. And so I do that in summertime. And I'm just seeing kind of where my travels and my experiences will lead me, and it might lead me into my next endeavor. But I'm still competing. I had a couple of podiums last year.
Yeah.
Certainly getting harder with the younger kids that don't have the injury list that I have. And just some days my body hurts on tour. It's like I feel everything. And then you see these like young little puppies running around, and I'm just like, oh, I'm so jealous right now. Nothing on them hurts.
I mean, in the world of professional athletes, while you're not an old person, you are old in the world of professional athletes. But Tom Brady has proved that you can be old and still be successful. My last question that I have for you here before I get into my last segment of the show is just a hypothetical question, is thinking about your life. Like, how would it be different if you got 4th place at the Olympics in 2006?
I mean, it would still be hard, just missing. But if you technically win 4th, it probably would have been a lot different for me than losing at gold, which was how it was spun with the media. And it was only like my cousin and everyone later be like, you still won a silver medal. Like, everyone's been harping on you, but how many people walk away from the Olympics with the silver? Like, you hear all these people saying these negative things towards me, and it's like, okay, please tell me how you would have handled that in your Olympics. Like, you're sitting on the couch doing nothing. I'm sorry, that was not your Olympic experience. And that's hard. And that's also hard when I'm watching summer or other Olympics, and I see how commentators are critiquing, or certain people are critiquing these athletes. And it's like, sometimes it's like, how dare you? Because some of these athletes are doing absolutely incredible things and have sacrificed so much of their lifestyle and a normal, quote unquote, what a normal lifestyle would be, sacrificing their bodies and putting themselves in for a few minutes to have something go perfect. And it just doesn't always happen. And my heart aches for athletes when it doesn't come together and they have those moments. Like, because I just know, I'm like, I want to be there to hug them or help them. Or even if they just are short of making the Olympic team. Like, I totally know, because I've had to experience that. And the U.S. team travels together the whole time during our Olympic buildup in those few months before qualifying for the team. And then it's announced, because we're probably somewhere else in the world. And now you have to get into the car with some people that have made the team and some people that haven't. It is awkward, but everyone's still trying to be excited for each other and support each other. But then there's empathy, there's sorrow, there's so many emotions packed into one rental car. It shouldn't be allowed.
All right. Well, we're going to end the body of the podcast with that. Now it's time for something that I call inappropriate questions. And I get someone that you know to ask 3 questions, and they can be anything. And I was able to get someone that you know very, very well. A peer, a fellow student, a partner in crime, maybe a makeout partner. I don't know. I was able to get Alex Diebold to ask the inappropriate questions, and are you ready for question number 1 from Alex?
Okay.
All right, here we go.
Lindsey Jacobellis. Alex Diebold, longtime teammate, former classmate, here to ask you a few inappropriate questions. You were once high school prom queen. If you were queen of snowboarding for one day, what's one rule you can change? It'd be anything you want. If you were snowboard queen for a day, what's one rule you would change?
All right, you're the queen. What do you change?
Well, first of all, I was never prom queen. I don't think I was ever prom queen.
You would know if you were.
Our school was pretty small, and I'm like, you block out a lot of high school. I don't think I would have blocked that one out. But queen for a day, I would just have to make all the men in FIS listen to me because that was always a challenge, to always have a voice, and that they would have no reason and no ability not to listen to whatever I said.
Is it just like a bunch of 60-year-old white men just saying no to everything except for ski racing?
No, it's just an establishment that has been around and they have their rules, and, snowboarders came in and they're the rebels, and it was always just really frustrating that I was an athlete that had been on tour for so many years, and I only got a response of what I felt was the highest level of respect after I started in my 100th World Cup. And it was special because they gave me a 100 bib out of the start, and I had done testing, and they're like, well, since this is Lindsey's 100th start, we would like to hear from what she thinks needs to be changed about the course. And I was like, oh my God, it only took 100 starts to get that said to me. I'm killing it.
All right, we're going to jump into your second inappropriate question.
You grew up doing a lot of different sports, playing fast pitch softball, riding four-wheelers. Obviously, things with snowboarding took off. With the Summer Olympics just ending, if you could have been an Olympian in a summer sport, other than surfing, because you're a great surfer, other than surfing, if you could have been a summer Olympian in another sport, what would it have been?
I would have to say I love gymnastics, and not that I had ever made it to any level of Olympic caliber in the gymnast. I loved it. I loved that dynamic and how there were so many different disciplines and different opportunities to shine. I'd have to say that. And you always had just like the bedazzling leotard. It was just a way to feel a little bit more like a girl, because in Boardercross sometimes you had the baggy clothes. Like, it was just a little too much masculine energy.
Fair enough. We're going to go into your final inappropriate question.
You've had a long and incredibly successful career in snowboarding, winning in pretty much every discipline. And for a long time, you were known for the world's worst grab, which is BS because you have wins in halfpipe and slopestyle. Of your snowboard career, what do you think is your best grab you've ever done?
Well, my method is the method that heard around the world. And I mean, despite the fact that I landed funky, just because that trick does throw you off balance, and if you're not ready, it does make you fall on your heels. I'd say it was probably executed pretty well, and I had really good body position and cross, but I would say my favorite grab to do would be on hillside wall in the halfpipe doing a crail grab. So that was your back arm on pretty much the nose of your board, and your legs are out straight and your body's kind of tweaked around. It was another like super awkward position to put your body in, and it took coordination and flexibility, and it was just not something that was done all the time. So I really liked that one.
All right, there we go. That is Inappropriate Questions, and that's our podcast. And your story is so easy to sum up. It's like East Coast girl with every opportunity in the world, takes advantage of all of them. She makes it to the Olympics, makes a costly mistake on a global stage. She then continues her dominance on the snowboard world for 20 years while never living down that Olympic blunder. But finally, in her 5th Olympics, Lindsey Jacobellis fires the shot heard round the world and helped her erase the demons of her past. And it's going to be a Disney feel-good movie one of these days. That'll inspire the next generation of athletes. It's a great story of perseverance. I thank you for sharing it, and I thank you for your time.
Yeah, no, it was great. I had a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
So that was time with Lindsey Jacobellis, and what a great redemption story. I mean, after she took the silver medal in 2006, the whole world was against her, it seemed like. And every Olympic year, the same stories would be brought up, and she would have to relive her worst nightmare in front of a national audience, in front of a global audience. And then she'd get to the Olympics and she wouldn't perform well. And that would be even worse for her because all the commentators would talk about her blunder and talk about her not being able to get on the podium. Which really isn't fair because she's a 10-time X-Games Gold Medalist. She's always dominated everything in Boardercross. The Olympics is the only event that she wasn't really dominant at. And the announcers and everybody in the world really never gave her the credit she was due because of that Olympic blunder. But everything came together in 2022, and Lindsey was finally able to get that silver medal monkey off her back. What a career, what a story, and hopefully we'll see Lindsey win her next Olympic medal in Italy, and it'll be a full circle redemption story. But if not, well, I'm happy that I had one of, if not the best Boardercross athlete of all time on the show. So that's the podcast. At this point, I want to thank you for listening, ask you to review me wherever you listen, and please, please, please support my incredible sponsors who make this podcast happen. The brands I'm talking about are Stanley, Outdoor Research, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, Elon Skis, Best Day Brewing, and Club Med. Have a great week, everyone.